Hey guys, welcome yet to another of my pro plan videos. I am a little bit late on this one. I did not expect them to release Golbez so soon. This was actually 2 days just after we had our last event. Anyway, in this video I will of course be covering Golbez, but while I'm at it I will also be covering the upcoming banners featuring Lenna and Noctis as well. As always, you can use the timestamps to skip ahead to the section that you are interested in. Without further ado, let's get started. First off, a quick look on how I did on recent banners and events. As you can see, I did take the opportunity to save quite a bit. First off, I skipped Queen and Jihl beyond the free multiples of course. I did go for Kelger, that was the only banner I recently pulled. They gave us 3 free multiples, so after that I went in 2 more times to get 100G tokens. Didn't get his FR unfortunately. I went in then with tickets, got his FR in like 200 something tickets, and then I decided to just round it up to 300 tickets to hopefully get his BT. Unfortunately, did not get his BT when I hit 300 tickets. I was at the 50 BT token cap at that point in time, so I decided now is really as good a time as any and just went in and redeemed Kelger's BT. So overall I spent 10k gems, 300 tickets and 50 BT tokens, which is pretty low considering that this was across many banners and events. So I was pretty happy overall. It's a good breather from all the gems and tickets that I spent not too long ago. Alright, so coming to Golbez's banner, which was released alongside Mission Quest Stage 3. They did change up the banner in the Jihl version of the game where they gave him Garnet as his banner secondary featured character. In JP it was actually Rinoa here. Anyway, coming to Golbez, he did get quite a bit of rework. His S1, S2, EX, LD and BT damage all got reworked. His EX buff also got bumped up a little bit in terms of the auras. I think it has a little bit more HP damage up currently. One of the big things that changed with Golbez though is his BT aura. While it lasts for 6 turns, now it carries also the party HP damage cap of plus 30%, and Golbez himself gets an additional plus 70% on top of this, which means that while his BT aura is up, Golbez has a HP damage cap plus 100%, which is huge for his role as a damage dealer. If you're not aware also, Golbez BT aura does also have the added effect of Setzer's Freeze Joker, meaning that while Golbez BT aura is up, enemies cannot gain Brave, and since this is tied to a BT aura and not to buff or debuff, essentially you are sort of immune to HP damage while Golbez has his BT aura up. Sort of, there are still some attacks that bypass this, and of course the Lufenia Orb style instant kill attacks would still kill you, but that's a pretty good damage mitigation ability right there. Golbez gets a newly released FR, and overall it is a pretty good FR for his kit. First off, the first conditional requires you to do some sort of elemental weakness damage on your turn for plus 40%, and the second requires you to do dark elemental attacks during your turn for plus 35%. To help you fulfill both conditionals, Golbez thankfully also has the added effect of giving the entire party Dark Enchant while you are in his force time. So it should be no problem hitting both conditionals with that. On top of this, while you are in his force time, if you are doing elemental weakness damage, you get an additional HP damage plus 50% and Brave and HP damage cap plus 50%. This is also pretty good and it stacks with his BT aura as well. So assuming you are in Golbez's BT plus aura and force time, Golbez himself gets a whopping plus 150% HP damage cap up just from his FR and BT. This should really not be underestimated, as it really ramps up the damage that he can do, considering also of course that, as I mentioned, almost his entire kit got reworked in damage. So he is actually currently one of the top, I would say, in terms of damage dealers, and he is pretty straightforward to play. I don't think that he quite breaks the meta, because I think that distinction goes to both Estos and Aranya, but Golbez would come pretty close to them, I would say. That being said, similar to the reasons of why I skipped Queen and Jihl Nabat, I don't really think I need an updated damage dealer, at least at this point, so I decided to skip Golbez. The funny thing also is that the Shinryu stage in Mission Quest 3 requires you to bring characters from Final Fantasy VI, and Golbez actually cannot meet that conditional, which is a shame. He might be usable in, I guess, one of the other mission quests, but I might still, I guess, maybe break down and pull for him with tickets, because I already do have his BT from way back before, so the only weapon that I'm missing for him is actually his FR. But I will probably, or I guess I am leaning more towards skipping him actually. Next up, we have the World of Illusions Divine Spiritus Leviathan stage, and I for one am looking forward to this event, because historically the World of Illusion stages are pretty mechanics heavy, and it's really those kind of fights that I really enjoy. Lenna will be the primary featured character on this event, and in this event she of course gets a rework, and also on top of this a newly released FR and BT weapon. All of Lenna's S1, S2, EX and LD all gets a damage rework, and on first glance they don't seem like too much. I think they are around 5 to 6 HP dumps in total, which in today's standards is pretty mediocre even for support characters, but hold that thought because her BT aura really changes things up, and I'll come to that later. Along with this rework across her base kit, her LD also gets +1 additional use, which is quite nice, because that's where a big chunk of her healing and damage comes from. Moving on to the BT, first off, when you use Lenna's BT, it heals the entire player party for 100% of their max HP, and the healing can overflow to 140% of your max HP value. Upon use, Lenna gets an 8-turn BT aura, and it carries the usual party support auras, and this time it's something along the lines of party brave gain plus 50%, brave damage cap plus 20%, HP damage plus 20%, and HP damage cap plus 30%. While Lenna's BT aura is up, you can actually overflow healing from any source up to 140% of your max HP value. This is pretty handy because this actually helps you to fulfill one of her force time conditionals, but I will come to that when I cover her FR weapon. One of the key things though of Lenna's BT is that while the BT aura is up, Lenna will trigger a follow-up attack called Mega Flash Shot after her own turn. I think this is very similar in mechanics to characters such as Rosa, for example, where Rosa gets the additional follow-up attack after her own turn as well. So the same thing for Lenna. This follow-up attack ignores enemies' defense because all it does is dump Lenna's Brave into HP attack equivalent to her Brave cap 4 times. So the good thing is that this will then means that it ignores enemies' defense and resistances, but it also means that this follow-up attack cannot shave or break the enemy. This attack will also heal the entire party based on the HP damage dealt, but only up to 20% of the character's max HP value. Overall, a pretty nice ability. The extra 4 HP dumps ignores defense as mentioned, and also further increase the damage that she does. And considering that the rest of her kit have somewhat mediocre number of HP dumps, in my mind, if you want to use Lenna, you should really be gunning for her BT as well. it makes a significant increase in her overall DPS. On this event, Lenna also gets a new force weapon. Similar to her BT, her force weapon also heals the entire player party for 100% of their max HP value, and as usual can overflow up to 140% of your max HP. Lenna Force has two conditionals, and they are pretty generic conditionals to note. The first requires you to just end your turn with your HP at 100% or more, and this gives you plus 45%. It should be no issue getting this conditional because Lenna can overheal the party, plus she will heal the party anytime she takes a turn, not only from her LD attack but also from her follow-up Mega Flash shot. The second conditional just requires you to end your turn without having any debuffs on you, and this gives you plus 30%. This should be a fairly easy conditional to meet because don't forget that Lenna does carry the Windrake arrow buff, which gives you 100% debuff evasion. You can still get hit by debuffs if the debuffs are guaranteed hit, and you should take note of that if the fight does carry that, because if that is happening then it might be a bit tricky to meet the second force conditional. But beyond those specific circumstances, you should be getting at least plus 75% a turn. One nice thing about Lenna's force conditionals is that it really just requires you to end your turn. It doesn't actually require you to attack. So you could also use, for example, a force gauge charging ability, which normally gives you plus 50% force gauge and still meet both conditionals, which means that you can get the usual, like plus 125, 130% force gauge bonus if you pair Lenna with a force gauge charger. I am intrigued and I am leaning more towards a pull for Lenna, but I'm not too sure yet, and I'll cover more into the reasons why on the next slide. There should be also a second banner on this event featuring Noctis, BT and FR. This isn't anything new. Noctis already had those weapons released before, and he will not be getting a rework here. Having said that, Noctis is still a pretty good character, especially if you need turn warping and low turn count sort of runs. Do note though that Noctis isn't very straightforward to play. He does take some practice to master, but he should still serve you well if you want to pull for him. For me, it's an easy skip, mainly because I already have Noctis fully built, so there's really no need for me to pull on the second banner. Alright, so on this part of the event, I will be giving my thoughts on the characters that are released over these two events. Usually I sort of place characters just only across two categories. The first category is good value, which are characters that I think most people should pull for because they will add so much value to your roster even regardless of who else you already have built, just by virtue of how useful they are. The second category I call role fulfillment, and generally characters here are still very good and can of course do endgame content very comfortably, but they also fulfill sometimes similar roles and conditionals as other characters, so depending a bit more on who you already have built on your roster, you may be able to skip them pretty comfortably. This time around I placed all 4 characters across the role fulfillment category, and as you can see I sort of put Garnet on the far right. So I'll start off with her first, and really nothing against Garnet, she is still a pretty good support. The only thing about her is that she's sort of aged a bit because we have quite a lot of more recent support characters being released, to the point where I don't really see a big need to pull for Garnet if you don't have her yet. She is also of course competing with Lenna, who's also being released roughly around the same time, and if you really want one support character between the two, I would actually recommend to go for Lenna instead, mainly on the virtue of Lenna's debuff evasion and the fact that Lenna will probably outdamage Garnet, even after you count in Garnet's overhead follow-up attack. Which brings me to Lenna. Now I put Lenna, Golbez and Noctis all on the left, and this is really in no particular order. It really depends on what you really need for your roster. If you are in the mood to pull for a support character, then there's really nothing wrong going for Lenna. She would probably serve you well if you are lacking a support character. Like I said earlier in the video, I am leaning more towards a pull, and that's because I really like her force conditionals being very generic. That's always a good sign because you can generally use those characters as your main FR. Lenna's damage isn't too bad as well, considering she's a support character, but this is only if you have her BT greened, because she does lean heavily into her Mega Flash Shot follow-up attack to supplement her damage capabilities. Support wise, she is pretty good. Debuff evasion is still pretty nifty to have, and Lenna can easily apply that for the entire party. Lenna can also of course heal the party and provide overheals and batteries as well, which is always nice to have on a support character. The one big drawback I think for Lenna is mainly the fact that she doesn't have a force gauge charging ability, and to me, at least for my playstyle, is pretty huge. This means that I would need to fit in another character just to charge the force gauge if I bring Lenna, and it makes team building a little bit tighter than usual. It is also a shame because of Lenna's force conditionals. You could pair that with a force gauge charging ability to give you something like 125-130%, but because Lenna herself doesn't carry a force gauge charging ability, you are forced to rely on another character if you wish to do so. If you don't mind that though, I think Lenna would serve you well, and you can of course always just go into Lenna force time and spam echoes across her and other characters and quickly reach into nice force gauge bonus percentage just by virtue of how generic her conditionals are. And of course Lenna herself can make good use of this with her follow-up attack doing nice damage as well. Moving on to Golbez. Golbez, in my mind at least, is a very straightforward damage dealer. In a way, I guess somewhat similar to Tifa, Golbez is the type of character that you sort of press buttons and get damage. It's just that straightforward to play. And just don't get me wrong, and please don't misquote me, I'm not saying Golbez is Tifa or anything like that. All I'm saying is that it is pretty straightforward and pretty beginner friendly. There's not a lot of setup required. Once you get into Golbez turns, whichever button that you press with him, you are more or less guaranteed to do some pretty nice damage. That is what I'm, I guess, trying to allude to. Throughout his kit, he does also have the weird niche of doing multiple types of weapon damage, because part of his damage comes from his dragon, I guess, that's following him, his shadow dragon, which can be handy if, for example, if you are trying to hit force conditionals that require one weapon type over the other, Golbez can still potentially fulfill that. If you are bringing Golbez though, generally I would recommend you to use his force as the main force time, because it would be very easy to meet both conditionals with the rest of the party members. Golbez will give the Dark Enchant, and Golbez can then Dark Imperil debuff on the bosses so that everyone can make full use of his elemental weakness. The one drawback though is that Golbez's Dark Elemental Imperil debuff is not framed, so depending on the fight, you may find it dropping off if the boss constantly cleanse themselves or apply buffs on themselves. You can of course use a call that lands a frame debuff. Anna Crow is particularly useful. She lands a frame debuff that gives both Holy and Dark Imperil. Anna Crow is notable because Anna Crow call on Golbez also means that Golbez can potentially recharge his EX by RNG, and Golbez EX I think is the skill I guess in his entire kit that hits the hardest. Usually his skills are roughly I think 9 or 10 HP dumps, which doesn't sound like meta breaking for a DPS character, but you couple this with the fact that his PT and force time gives you 150% HP damage cap for himself, and this translates to a boatload of damage. If you are fairly new to the game, then I think Golbez is a pretty good pickup, not only of course to fulfill our roster, but by virtue of the fact that he is fairly easy to use, then he would be pretty beginner friendly overall. The same I think can't really be said for Noctis. Noctis is probably the character that requires the most use and practice to master. The turn warping requires you to pay very close attention to the turn order bar, because things such as high turn rate or breaking the bosses would of course affect the turn order bar, and the turn warp happens after that generally. So if you are not careful, you could potentially mess up the turn order with Noctis's warp step. That being said, Noctis's warp step is still a pretty unique buff in the game, despite us having like 170 characters overall. The fact that he can apply warp step for the entire party and give everyone in your party turn warping mechanics cannot really be underestimated. And to kick this off as well, while you're buffed with warp step, you also do not increase the turn count, so it is actually extremely easy to get 0 turn runs with Noctis. Noctis's PT also allows him to do a follow-up attack anytime you take an action, so that is also something pretty useful to have, and because of this, he still does pretty decent damage overall in the current meta. That being said though, if you've skipped Noctis so far, there's really no strong need to pull for him now, so I would say that it is probably better to just continue skipping him in that case. Whether or not to pull for Noctis, I think largely depends on how much you value and want to use his swap step mechanic. So that's it for this video. In summary, I plan to likely skip Golbez FR. I will likely pull for Lenna. Maybe if I get extremely lucky and I score Lenna's FRBT on the free pulls, I may go back and pull for Golbez FR with tickets. But if I have to spend a lot of resource on Lenna, then I will likely skip Golbez altogether. I'm still thinking about Lenna a little bit. Logically speaking, I don't really have a big need for her entire kit, her healing, debuff evasion and all that, but the fact that she is a pretty nifty support overall and her FR conditions are pretty good is to me something very attractive. But let's see. As always, I hope the video has been helpful, and if you enjoyed the content, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps a lot. Till then, I will see you guys in the next pool plan video. Bye!